Hello and welcome back. I'm delighted to be joined here in this conversation with two SAP colleagues. I've got Farooq, based in Melbourne, and I've got Padmini Ranganathan here in San Francisco. Good morning and good late evening to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. Good morning to you as well.
Let me just do a quick intro. Barbara is the... Barbara, why don't you introduce yourself? Go for it.
Yes, thank you, Nandini. Look, I'm the head of product strategy for SAP's Procurement Solutions. I am based out of Melbourne right now. I'm soon to be, due to move to Europe, but obviously the pandemic has delayed those plans for the time being. But yeah, glad to be here and thank you for having me.
Wonderful, thank you. I know it's very, very late or early, your time in Melbourne. And Padmini, what about you? I know we've met before in person, we're under different circumstances. Tell us a little bit about you and your role.
Hi, Nandini. Yes, it is a virtual world we live in now. I lead within Baba's team. I lead the Procurement 5.0 topics, actually, setting the stage for the future of procurement using digital technologies and transformation. So I'm really happy to be here talking about my favorite topics.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to just have a conversation here. First and foremost, the world has changed a lot this year. What I'd love to understand is, for everyone out there are gains to have been made by companies who have taken the digital and automation route. And one of the questions that we hear very much is, why now? What are the gains you've seen? And secondly, what would your advice be for those who are a little bit hesitant about going now? Maybe Barbara, Let me start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Nandini. I mean, look, there's a few very interesting trends that are present and have been present in the marketplace even before the pandemic, and each of these trends has accelerated, and all indications are that they will continue to accelerate given the conditions we live in today. So, firstly, we see that productivity in general, productivity growth has declined over the past 10 to 15 years. Despite all the advancements that have happened in technology, we know that productivity, and you can cut it by geography, you can cut it by sector, is not increasing at the pace that we've historically seen it increase. And one of the key factors for that, I mean, there's many debates economically about why that's the case, but one of the definitive factors is that organizations are not able to adopt technology at the pace that would appropriately lead to an increase or a dramatic increase in productivity growth. The second, the opposite sort of trend we see is on, the rise of the digital economy. Mm-hmm. We have seen that happening since the start of 2000, becoming more and greater share of GDP over time, and that's been accelerating over the past 5 years. And I think we all know anecdotally, as well as through any sort of data sets, that acceleration will continue, and will actually accelerate even further now post-pandemic. The third very interesting trend that has started in the past few years, and is also something that will likely continue as a result of the pandemic, is a flattening effect, and that's the flattening of globalization. I mean, The Economist has recently termed it as globalization because, as far as trade goods are concerned, we know that intercontinental trade is decreasing. Nationalistic tendencies have already forced us down this path previously, and now the reliability and certainty elements of supply chains will likely move organizations more towards a thinking of near-term or near-shore manufacturing and so on and so forth to drive greater certainty. So these are trends that have existed. And when we look about how that translates for procurement, I mean, there's some very interesting factors that we have to keep in mind. We know that productivity needs to increase. I believe that productivity, let's not just talk about procurement. Procurement can become the avenue by which productivity and technology adoption increases for the entire organization. There was a customer who said to me that procurement is really the window to the outside world. And that's a trend that I think is going to be critical as organizations try to become more efficient post-pandemic. Also, the second most really interesting trend that I want to highlight, and I'll pause right here and then turn it over to Padmini, is the idea of suppliers truly becoming an arm for co-innovation for organizations. I mean, I was reading in a report just yesterday that one very, very large customer of ours said, actually, all of our innovation happens through our suppliers. Who better to manage that process than procurement organizations? And when we see the fact that supply chain itself is a board level topic for 90+% of executives that are out there, and money is not a factor that's in their way when they're making these decisions, it really does give procurement leaders the chance and the opportunity to rise to the occasion and lead this agenda topic. And it's an agenda topic much more important and much broader than the typical metrics that procurement has been monitored by.
Very, very true. Let me bring Padmini in here. So really great points here, Barbara, in terms of recovery and digital transformation. I think I hear you completely on this. Visibility of spend allows better informed decision making. Secondly, data rules. I think something that we hear quite a lot about. And also, that taking that leap in terms of future technology. Padmini, anything to add before we move to our next question? Anything you'd add to what Barbara said?
Absolutely. I mean, when we look at pandemic behaviors, some of them are here to stay. I think companies have identified opportunities for optimization and the supply interpersonalization and relationships, not only with the suppliers, but also with internal stakeholders. And so in all of this, the digital transformation that has already been happening over the last decade, I think has shown results. I mean, when we were able to use, for example, the large digital business networks to bring PPE and hospital beds to places where it was more needed, that's an agility in motion right there. And how do we now scale that and make our supply chains more resilient? So the two things I would add there is it's about data, of course, the right technology, but data at the right source, from the right source, and within an integrated process chain. A good example of this is as we are looking at asset and equipment, we are used to measuring, for example, overall equipment effectiveness. But if you now bring the usage, machine performance, availability, quality together with operational performance, and then build it into your spend and managing your contracts or for maintenance, that's a highly optimized value chain based on data. And that's the sort of shifts that we are going to see. We are also going to see more connectivity. We talked about the ability to bring suppliers in as co-innovators, leveraging digital transformation to really bring both those internal stakeholders and the external stakeholders together. Leveraging connectivity is going to help increase not only procurement's role, but also procurement's IQ in the process, using the digital IQ in the bargain.
Thanks, Padmini. You raise a great point here. And, with the collapse, you talked about this integrated supplier network, with the collapse of traditional supply networks and this need for end-to-end view of spend, perhaps you could just share a moment, both of you, about the benefits of the broader Ariba network system, ecosystem, if you will, how it works, co-innovation, partner-led innovation, what you're seeing right now. So I'll open that up to whoever wants to take it, but who'd like to go first?
Yeah, I'll take an initial stab at it, and then Padmini can keep me honest, right? I mean, I think there's two elements to it, right? I mean, I think traditionally, when we started develop the network, and for a long time afterwards, the focus was on, obviously maximizing the number of suppliers you're connected to, right? And converting processes that were analog to digital, right? So you're not going to use fax machines, you're not going to use, other methods. You're just going to digitally transact. And I think for many technologies, that was ultimately, when they first came out, the goal. Take something you used to do on paper and do it electronically. And that's okay, and that obviously drives efficiency. But it really doesn't use the capability to its full potential. I mean, sometimes I take a look at go back and take a look at a paper requisition, right? And now compare it to the requisition you have in your e-procurement system, whatever you use, and ask yourself, what really is so different? Have you just taken those fields you filled out on paper and you now have them available in a system? Or have you actually used the technology to drive some nonlinear effect? And that's, I think, the journey that we're going through on our side now, which is how do we drive those nonlinear effects because we are doing things digitally and not doing them in an analog fashion. So, I mean, firstly, for example, you want to make sure that you expand across the entire footprint of the source to pay, source to settle production process, right? I mean, when you start talking about, consignment, subcontractor processes, you start talking about forecast planning and inventory management, that's more than just digitally representing purchase orders and invoices.
Great.
The second element of it that I think is so critical and important is the idea that, well, when you have all this data, right, ultimately speaking, what can you do with the data? Can you start highlighting trends and behaviors and start giving insights to customers in a manner that's compliant to all the privacy regulations, right? So that's, I think, those are the two elements that, where we're moving the direction of our product to be able to drive, benefits to our customers beyond just the idea of, hey, I've made a digital connection and, that digital connection itself is going to start engendering you some form of efficiency. That's great, but, there's so much more you can do when you actually have a network-driven data process.
Cool.
Yeah, Padmini?
Yeah, Padmini, I'm actually going to interject here, just given I can see audience questions coming in. I'm going to keep us moving forward and come back if we have time. And I know this is a topic very close to your heart, Padmini. So, I participated in Sapphire this year, as did many within the ecosystem. And it was wonderful to see your CEO, Christian, state the importance of sustainability as a business imperative. How do you see the areas in which procurement can really lead business, drive corporate social responsibility, and frankly expand beyond, to all layers of the supply chain and beyond? So maybe Padmini, let me bring you in here, given I know it's a passionate area for you, an area of passion for you.
Absolutely. I mean, we got to leave the right world for our children, and we got to probably rectify some of the scale defects that we put in place in the 80s and 90s and then really bring this to bear. So, clearly intelligent organizations are sustainable organizations is what our CEO, Christian Klein, said. And I think that it starts ground up from data. It starts with transparency. It starts with the ecosystem that Baba talked about and the networks and the transparency that these networks can create in building not only sustainable organizations, but resilient organizations. So let's take a couple of examples here, right? Clearly, with the shifts that are happening in the supply chain, buy local is becoming more predominant again. So in terms of buy local, companies that are thought leaders are looking at introducing more diversity in their supply base to be more agile, to be more flexible, and to be more resilient. But why not also bring in small businesses and local empowerment as part of the supply chain? And so social enterprises and small businesses are becoming a key factor for many companies that are looking to drive spend to more resilient supply chains. The second area is clearly the resource utilization. Again, when we start looking at products and material flows, being able to track those material flows, not just in terms of quantity and cost and quality and loss of shipments and so on, but what if we start tracking it also across some of these sustainability metrics like resource utilization, carbon emission, water utilization? We are seeing a lot of depletion in natural resources, and so how are your supply base as they get into more sustainable businesses, leveraging these natural resources and putting natural resource management back into practice is something you can track ground up. And last but not the least, I think the circular economy is bringing to bear new intermediaries. And so as we expand our network ecosystem, bringing some of the new players into the visible supply chain, material recovery facilities or MRFs that bring waste back into the first mile of the recycled supply chain. These are ways in which procurement, along with supplier collaboration, supplier co-development, can bring sustainability to bear across the end-to-end process operations, because it's no longer just a CSR initiative. I think our board member Adair said it really well. For every dollar in CSR spend, you're actually spending $400 in indirect procurement alone. So how could you better leverage the $400 to do good?
That's fantastic, Padmini. I can see a question here come in, Barbara. Maybe you want to take this. So given what Padmini just shared, which is terrific, are you seeing that you have grounds for optimism? I think that's what there's a real desire. Are we seeing optimism is in terms of supplier compliance, transparency, and doing good?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, right? I think, I think there was a report out like last year, in the Business Roundtable, a lot of companies made, and they committed to the idea of stakeholder obligations, right? Beyond just shareholder obligations. That said, we didn't necessarily see too much action over the past year. However, the reason I'm optimistic about this is because when we see clearly buying behavior, when we see surveys that, from employees that work for companies, when we see surveys from consumers, very, very clearly we know that people want to make an impact. They want to make sure that their dollar makes an impact. And, when I couple that with the fact that when I talk to almost all of my customers, this is, frankly speaking, beyond any of the AI and artificial intelligence, this is the topic that gets people most excited. And this is the topic where they really want to make a big difference, right? So yeah, I do have grounds for optimism. I think it's a very different way of thinking for businesses in general. I think businesses are searching for ways and opportunities on how they can actually leave a mark on their local communities, but they don't necessarily have all the answers. So, when you look at the data with respect to what people are saying who work for companies, what consumers are saying that want to make an impact, it actually does, again, put procurement in a position of leadership where they can actually raise their hand up and say, hey, organizations, you're trying to figure out how to make a difference. You're still struggling with the top and bottom line metrics that drive most of the behavior on the street. Let us show you how you can actually make a difference, beyond the CSR initiatives. Take a look at the spend profile, add diversity to your supply base, and there can be dramatic impact that can make effects on local communities. So, all in all, I myself have written about how there should be more that organizations want to do. But funnily enough, I do think, just talking to customers recently and observing some recent data and trends, even in the pandemic, that people really want to make an impact. And if people really want to make an impact, then organizations just have to figure out the way to do it. And procurement can lead the way.
I'm so sorry that our time has come to an end. We could stay and converse forever, us three, I'm sure. But there's grounds for optimism from the SAP team here. My thanks to both the leaders who are painting a picture of a much brighter reality. Thank you so much for your time, Padmini. Thank you so much for your time, Barbara. I wish you both a good night and a good day.